Welcome to the class. This is our second installment of the myths we live by, six myths we live by, and this is myth number two. And should we get started or should we wait a minute or two to see if people join?
We're 2 minutes after, so if somebody comes late, they can pop on our YouTube channel and watch the beginning.
Okay, well, this is early for me. So if you're able to turn, for those able to turn their cameras on, that's always helpful for me. It's a selfish request because it's easier when I feel like I'm talking to somebody live as opposed to this names that are sitting here. And So first of all, I'm just wondering if there was any leftover from last week that anyone wanted to just, I don't know if it's, maybe not everyone was here last week, so I'm not sure. But I always do like to see if there was any carryover or people had questions or anything like that. Um, and then you can just raise your hand or turn off your mic or turn on your mic, I guess would be. Nothing. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
I
Oh.
got your book. I love the
Mhm.
book, but I also like the diagrams and everything you showed
Uh-huh.
last week. Is
hmm
there any, it's those are not in the book, so is there any way that we might can have access to those materials?
That's a good question. It gets asked frequently. I probably don't. We'd have to look at the video. You know what you can do is you can go onto the YouTube video because we are putting these on. I don't know if they're posted yet. I don't see my friend Kim here yet. Where we do post them on my YouTube channel, I think. And so you're probably accessible through my website.
I'm
Uh,
I'm here, Karuna. It's accessible through the Buddhist centers, I believe, through the
oh,
website.
so through,
I can put a link in the chat.
Okay, great. Thanks. I
Mhm.
hope that helps. And if that doesn't, then we'll go ask me again and we'll go to the next level. Ferdy?
I was also
So
going to add, it was tremendously helpful for me to get your book and download it and read it, and I felt like I was hearing you in my head, and it really allowed me to relax because a lot of the things that I had trouble catching as they were going by
Yeah.
live
hmm
were there. So I think, although it's not officially a book study, it was very valuable for me to do that, and I appreciate being able to interact with the author. So thank you
Thank
for
you. Yeah.
doing that with the book.
And same for me to interact with the audience. I love it. I don't like myself. I mean, I like the interpersonal, the relationship is very important because also it keeps it current for me, rather than just totally theoretical. And I think that as I explained, well, many times I explained that, um, my goal is to make the ideas relevant, right, and useful. And I know as those of us who are Buddhist students, we do sort of love and get caught up in the study, the academic, right? And in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, I'm not just saying only in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, it's just the only one I know. We do emphasize study because uh, I mean, ultimately we emphasize experience. That's really super, super, super important. The reason we emphasize, not the reason, but one of the hallmarks of that is that these ideas are to be actualized. You see, they're not just for study, they're not just for academics. We sometimes joke about the difference between, like a geshe or a lama or whatever the other, a learned person in the Buddhist tradition and a professor in the university. I'm generalizing, of course, is that these you have to walk the talk, and that's why I feel very self-conscious even teaching because I'm not such a great practitioner. I've been doing this a long time and still, I'm still a student. So it helps me to be relevant, I guess is the long answer to your point, Ferdy. Yeah. Yeah. Anybody else?
Go ahead and get started.
Mhm. Okay. Did someone else say something? I should go? Okay. Let me share my screen. It's always a challenge. Just make you dizzy. Okay. So the second chapter it is titled The Myth of Identity. And we have six myths, and when I was in discussion with Wisdom Publications about the title, my original title was The Myths We Live By. And I know people like numbers. So then I explained last week we identify, the six myths we live by. The reason I have a little bit of a attachment to the title is because I don't want to make it sound like there's just six myths. There are really quite a few myths, but as we talked last week, the fundamental myth is the myth of reality. So if you're here today, without having been here last week for the introduction on the myth of reality, then I just encourage you to read that, to make sure you read that chapter or that myth, since it's the foundation of every other myth that we could possibly talk about. And I'm not going to review the material there, but it permeates every other myth that we talk about. So it'll flow in and out of our discussion. The title or the focus today is the myth of identity.
Karina,
And
I'm just going to interrupt really quick to say that link is into week one is in the chat if anyone wants to also watch it.
oh, okay, good. Thank you. I always forgot that. I'm getting more organized. Um, so what I'd like you to let's just settle for a moment. This just to arrive. So if you like to close your eyes, that's okay, or just gently close them. And then I have just a couple instructions here. First is just to feel that you're here now. You're not in the past or in the future thinking about what's going on later. You're just here, whatever here is. I don't know how you feel, if you're tired or you're alert, agitated or feel peaceful. It just is here. Whatever is here is what you got. And then just to become settled, let's just focus on the breath, a very common practice for settling the mind. I would add to it, I like this one practice that I learned a long time ago is to focus on the inhalation and the exhalation at the nostrils if you can. If that's not too, if you're blocked up or something, then you can do it at your tummy, the in and out of the breath of the stomach. And when you exhale, you count one. So then inhale, count, exhale two. Just do that till you get to 10. Rest them and don't squeeze. Don't try too hard. Just rest within the breath until you get to 10. And if I go a little longer, then I'd like you to then go backwards from 10 to 1. Okay, so it takes a couple minutes. Now with the breath, just being aware of the breath in the background. And then just notice the nature of your mind or your mood. But you're not hooking on anything. You're just watching it like looking from a building down at the traffic, way up high. You just watch what floats through the mind. Just let everything float through, because that's what it's doing anyway. not hanging on to any sound, not hanging on to any thought, not hanging on to any feelings. And then one analytical reflection I'd like to ask you is the mind always has is driven by an intention, always, at a very subtle level. But on a more gross level, if you can just reflect back to earlier before you joined the class, what was the motivation or intention that was driving you to come today? More of a more of kind of a feeling and a little bit verbal or conceptual, I should say. Okay, we'll get back into that maybe a little bit later as well. Um, what we're going to talk about is actually comes down to the question at the bottom of the slide was who is meditating? Okay, that's what we're going to talk about, look at today, think about who is meditating, okay? Who is reflecting? So, and I apologize, generally speaking, good slide presentations don't have a lot of words, but you can have a slide presentation that does have words. So I'm kind of giving this to you because it's I don't know, the words maybe are useful. You don't have to worry too much. When we're talking about the myth uh, of identity, so it's important to understand the myth is this idea of a fixed identity. So when I say, if I were to call your name out, if I say Patrick, or if I say Ferdy, or if I say Karen, John, when I say your name, when I say someone else's name, nothing really comes up for you, probably. But when I say your name, or someone says your name, you think, oh, he's talking to me, right? So if I were to criticize Kim, no one else here would have much reaction in the sense of feeling criticized, right? When I criticize Kim or I compliment her, then she's going, oh, and she has a sense of I. That's what we're talking about today. Okay? That's what we're talking about, that I. Why it's important. Okay, remember that in the Buddhist approach is not just about feeling good. And this is a big deal. This is a really, really big deal because when we look at the normal uh, sort of path, I guess you'd say, or intention of our minds, normal in a normal person, which is not that normal, I guess, but the normal drive is to feel good. And I'm simplifying it, but if you deconstruct even why you came to the class today, I don't know what your intentions were. Everyone thought about it. Maybe some people because, they enjoy the information. They want to learn something more, or they find it provocative, right? You know, just to be simplistic about it, all of those things are to feel good. They're to feel better. It's never, in Buddhist thought and Buddhist psychology, the sad thing is that we are really never satisfied. And part of that is the makeup of the world because everything is changing. So how do you stay in satisfaction? For example, I find it satisfying to relax in the evening and watch a good TV show, right? Or whatever your thing is. So you will notice that that sense of satisfaction, of feeling good, doesn't last very long. And in fact, what happens is you might really enjoy this show and you feel good at most for an hour or something, but then it's like it's over, or you're getting tired, or the episode is not that exciting, or the acting, something got you with this, it doesn't make sense. And your whole attitude changes. It doesn't matter what you're watching, whatever you like to watch. The fundamental problem that Buddha was articulating in the Four Noble Truths when he talked about the truth of suffering is that. Okay, I want it really understood. I mentioned last week, but I'm very adamant that we begin to understand what is this thing of suffering. And it's not a good word. I don't like the word because we tend to have a fixed idea of suffering means, this war in Iran, people, with suffering from cancer or whatever. It's usually identified in the Buddhist context. That is suffering, but that's considered the mildest or the basic form of suffering, which they call pain. Okay, the suffering of pain. That's what, almost always, and that includes emotional pain, by the way. Even that's considered basic. So, so we have two other levels of suffering, and when we get into that, that's not very common in our modern culture. Okay, the other two levels being, and this is not the class on that. I probably covered one of the chapters, but is what we call the suffering of change or the problem of change. How about that? Everything's there. So when we're sitting and we are actually tricked into thinking that sitting down and watching that show is going to satisfy us. It's not an intellectual thing. That's the thing. If, of course, all of us probably could say conceptually, intellectually, if we talk about, oh yeah, I know it's not, we could all say that. That's not the level I'm talking about. We're talking about spontaneous conditioning, this conditioning that we're under. And this is what the Buddhist teachings are saying. This is what the Buddhists are trying to say. We are conditioned to not be very logical, you know, to not, I mean, everyone can say, oh yeah, that show is not going to really satisfy you. And we say, yeah, but I want to relax for a little while. That's all okay. What we're saying is what we're hypnotized by, what we're conditioned by, is we go into watching that show on a subconscious level, that I really want to feel satisfied, content, have a feeling, a sensation of pleasure, that's where we're at. Um, And so when we're talking about the myth of identity, we're talking about who wants to feel that. Okay? See, rather than, and this is, rather than what we do, because we're so externally focused and so materially focused, that's our training. We begin to say, okay, TV or the dinner, whatever, food. Yeah, I get it. The food is changing in front of me. It's getting colder. Eventually it even gets moldy, and then I get full. The whole thing. We focus like the problem is in the food, but when we become very brutally honest, scary honest, okay, scary honesty will tell us that the problem is in the mind, not in the food. Not in the TV show, you know, not in the traffic, not in the fact that someone's not coming around. We're feeling, we're upset that they're not coming around. We're hoping they would. Not in the absence of the pleasure is not in the object. The trick is in the mind. And in this this myth, it's this idea that this I needs to be satisfied. And it will be satisfied by that TV show, it'll be satisfied by relaxing, it'll be satisfied by going to sleep. If I remember Lama Zopa saying, if going to sleep at night was an answer to tiredness, why do you have to sleep tomorrow night? It's like, and then we go, well, it's an answer to my tiredness tonight. But see, now we're going into the fundamental, we're going into deeper Buddhist kind of curse, saying, yeah, but we don't really care that you feel better tomorrow morning. I would care, but that's not the issue. That's not going to lead to fulfillment. What's going to lead to fulfillment is not being tricked anymore by this sense that you're going to be happy by sleeping. It's not going to go away. Now, I think I mentioned in almost all my classes or all the series of classes that if sleep were the solution, then we shouldn't have to sleep tomorrow night, right? So basically, what we're caught up in is this sort of wheel of dissatisfaction, satisfying, dissatisfying, satisfying, dissatisfying. And it's so fascinating because Lama Zopa Rinpoche, he was well known, but also I had experience with him. He never slept. So what about that? So he found the satisfaction because his mind was satisfied somehow on that level. He didn't have the need to sleep. And this is a common, not common, but a known effect or result of deeper meditation development. He didn't, I mean, I don't know if he didn't suffer from hunger. The body needed to eat or it would die, but we're not working on that level anymore. We're trying to get to a level of satisfaction. So the satisfaction, the body gets hungry, but where's the dissatisfaction? Is it in the hunger, the sensation in the stomach, or is it in the disturbance in the mind? If it's a disturbance in the mind, which it is, the beauty of this is that can be conquered, that can be alleviated. Every issue that confronts the mind and disturbs the mind can be rectified. That's amazing. But we have to make this shift that the problem is not in the food, the problem is not in the lack of sleep, the problem is in the mind and is in the mind. Now, one way to approach that is this identity, okay? This idea of identity. Okay. This identity, and I'm going to talk about this a few times, argues is that way we're set up to think this identity, me. So if I say your name or you think your identity, just think about here. So you're sitting here. Let's just okay. Okay, just reflect for a moment. So you're sitting here, I'm sitting here, and you have a sense, I do too. I don't mean to say only you. You have a sense, I am here. I'm listening to Karuna. Get that sense that you are sitting here right now. I am, right? If I say, Patrick, what are you doing? You'll say, I'm listening. Okay. Ferdy, if I say, what are you doing? You say, I'm listening to you. Everyone in this room, Amy, if I say, what are you doing? You say, I'm listening. Or I'm not listening. But it's always the I, right? Can you see it? Can you feel it? That I has three qualities. That I thinks, and this is very important, that I feels independent of everything else. Certainly independent of each other, right? I'm here, you're there. And you get that sense. Think of a time today when maybe you got upset. It can be anything, any feeling. You got hungry, you got irritated, you got agitated. A negative emotion is a little easier to work with. Okay. Now, reflect on that experience and see how that it was a person was in your, you know, in your mandala, so to speak, and you got upset or whatever. Now, I want you to relive that for a second. Maybe it was one of your children, maybe your partner. Now, feel the emotion and think, now I want you to turn your attention to I. I'm upset. I'm pissed off. I'm irritated. I'm tired. That I, we say I'm angry. Doesn't it feel like as if you're anger itself, but you're not. If the I was anger, the I could not see the anger. A mirror can't see itself. You have to, it's subject, object. The subject is always the I or the self or the ego. It's always experiencing an object, but it doesn't say that. It says, I am angry. I'm stiff. I hurt. I ache. We don't say, I'm feeling angry. Of course, we say it. Or I have anger. In Tibetan, in the Buddhist debates, they say, I have anger. But that's not how we think anyway. Can you see now that I want you to focus on that I. That I feels independent, doesn't it? It is independent of the anger, actually. It, it feels independent by itself. See that? That trick. It's a trick, but you have to feel it. I'm so angry with him. Feel that I. When we say that, that is, there's a conception, a perception of the I being independent. But guess what? It's dependent. It's dependent on you seeing that person, of the activation of that emotion, of a sensation. Okay? You see the object, I sees it. You experience the it. Maybe it's a voice that's harsh and rude. It stimulates a sensation of discomfort. It's recognized as discomfort or an unpleasant sensation. And then it says, then it creates all these elaborations. This I does all of that. Okay. That's important. So that's one of the core. I mentioned here. Well, it's not me, but I mentioned here that the I has three qualities that are false. One is that it thinks it's independent of everything. See, but it's dependent on that person, the vision you have of him or her, the sounds hitting your sense consciousness, your ear. All of this are dependencies. Not it. There's nothing independent, but we believe it is. So freedom emerges when attachment to rigid identity softens. So when you say, okay, we'll go on. I get caught on one slide. So this identity is a sense of I, me, or self, ego. It's what makes you feel unique. It's your uniqueness. Okay? And you are unique to, I mean, you're not me and I'm not you. But the way I'm not you and the way you're not me is not the way we conceive it. Okay? We conceive it incorrectly. We conceive it, I'm independent of you. I'm a complete independent entity. Okay? It's always there. Okay? So we confuse these temporary experiences with who we are. The self appears in every single experience, even when you're sleeping, even when you're in a, or we, even when we're in a coma, even when we're sort of, you know, not aware. It's always there. Okay? We don't say, I feel angry. We could say that. We don't say, I have anger. We say, I'm angry. It doesn't, even when we say, I feel angry, we're identifying I as the anger, okay? It fuses itself with thoughts and emotions, always. This is what it does. So these three core distortions are the self appearing as independent. When I say self, I mean your identity, right? Oh, I'm on the wrong slide. Sorry, the view is not quite, not the best view. Sorry about that. Okay, so appears independent. These are the core. I really want you to, you don't have to memorize them, but over time it's good to memorize them because this I, this sense of self, this identity appears as an independent entity, and it's not. It appears fixed, okay, or monolithic. It feels like it has no parts to it. It's this obelisk kind of thing. And it also appears permanent. That means unchanging. Permanent does not mean eternal. Okay, I'll make that very clear. That's an important distinction because it tends to be in our culture when we talk about something permanent, we're confusing it with eternal. Is that okay? Something eternal is not permanent, by the way. Let's just say, I know it's not, but let's say we talk about the sun as being eternal. I don't know what we call eternal. That sun is lasts a long time. Let's say eternal for our conversation. That sun is the sun is changing moment to moment. It's not a permanent phenomenon. Okay? What, yeah, we could say it's eternal. Okay? I don't know what is eternal, to be honest with you. I think things last a long time. I don't know if anything is eternal. Space, maybe. Okay, these assumptions create psychological suffering. That's the point of why we're talking about this, right? It's to get healthy. Our job is to get healthy. I don't care what Buddhist tradition we study. I don't care if we study it, if we study it or not. If we're not using it to get happier, then we don't understand the purpose of these teachings. Then it's just intellectual curiosity. Okay. So to talk about well, let me just ask, any questions? Anything, any comments? I see some chat. I didn't read them. Oh, that's the link, Kim's link. Okay. Anything curious?
Just to point out that in French, j'ai faim, I have hunger, they actually do think of it that way as
Yeah,
having a quality rather than being the quality.
interesting. I think there are some languages they do that. I remember I remember when I was very young, I was just getting involved with Hinduism and yoga, and there's a family of kind of hippie yogi, is this man and his wife and two kids, and they had all the, top knot and wearing the lungi and all that. And he was taught whenever he talked to someone, he would say, I have, I have, I have. It was like the strangest thing ever to hear. I mean, in one way, now I understand it and kind of respect, but because maybe languaging it that way helped him to separate his identity or this false sense of identity to these objects. Yeah. And there's a lot of tricks there, aren't there? So that's interesting. But do you think the French people are more, I don't know, awakened because of that? Maybe not. Okay. So, okay. Any other comments?
I just wanted to
I
say
have
my
a
favorite.
question.
Oh,
Oh,
okay.
sorry.
Kim, go ahead. And then next. Yeah.
Oh, I just wanted to say that my favorite thing that you said that really stuck out was that freedom happens when our attachments to our identities soften.
Yeah.
That's really.
And when we, I'm not gonna, I'd love to get into the psychology of it, I love this stuff, and I have a couple slides that would do that, but I'm gonna try and refrain. But when, we all probably know that Buddhism talks about attachment and desire as being sort of the problems, right? When we talk about why it's freedom, is at the moment, what happens for the meditator as we get better and better and quieter, you know, everything is passing in front of us. And what we do is we cling, don't we? We stick to, like, so let's say we're in a good space, we're meditating, and then all of a sudden, oh, I got that appointment, or something like that, right? That's just a thought. At that point, our meditation kind of stops because we cling, we stick, maybe sticky. It becomes very sticky. That's the real meaning of attachment, okay? That's the real meaning of clinging. So when in practicing this therapy, so to speak, of meditation, the meditation therapy becomes more and more where that clinging gets looser and also becomes, in the beginning, we're clinging to some big concept that comes in our mind, and we get better at that. And then we see we're clinging. So for the deep meditator, he or she is watching the nanoseconds, is aware of the nanoseconds arising and falling. And also then is practicing detachment. That's the real meaning of detachment. Practicing this part where, we're meditating and we're able just to observe without too much clinging, and then we catch ourselves, something provocative comes up, and we cling, and all of a sudden we're lost. So that happens at every level of meditation, all the way down to very, very, very subtle. Um, when w just to build on that for a second, the antidote to that is not more mindfulness necessarily. You have to apply something to the mindfulness. You have to apply something to meditation. Meditation is not just about focusing. Okay, it doesn't lead to any enlightened or awakened state. Did you know that? Just focusing does not lead to any result, any long-term result. Sorry. What leads to is focusing and then applying this wisdom that we're talking about. And then you analyze the thoughts, the concepts, the feelings, as whether in terms of how they exist within reality. Last week's chapter. Okay. So it's a balance. Our meditation becomes a balance of focus and introspection. In the Tibetan, the Buddhist, not this, the Buddhist tradition is its hallmark is that quality. Most meditation traditions are about focusing.
Hmm.
And focusing has an incredible benefit. I mean, out of this world kind of benefit. So it's a good thing, but it's not, and the Buddhists are very critical. That's the problem with Buddhists. They're like all Virgos or something. So that so that what happens is um so what Buddha was saying is great, but as long as you just focus, I want you to become free forever, and it won't do it. So maybe some of us don't want that, right? And that's fine. But that's sort of the hardcore quality of Buddhism. It's saying, you can do this to improve your lives, no problem. But ultimately, we're talking about freedom. Well, there was another question. Yeah. Someone had another.
Yes, I have.
Yeah.
Thank you, Karuna,
Yeah.
for these teachings. Appreciate it. So in trying to break the myth of the eye, so there's that method, right, that teachers teach about analyzing the parts.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so and also there's the idea that that we need to have a non-affirming negation
Mm-hmm.
of that object. Can
Yeah.
you? I trying to reconcile that because in analyzing the parts, isn't that in a way affirming? So by breaking down the myth of the eye, I'm trying to affirm that it has its parts. That's how I'm
Uh,
looking at it. So how do I bridge those two things?
so that's a pretty this I love the question. And kind of advanced, right? You've been studying a while, so I know that probably people are maybe not there at that, have investigated as much as I think it was Cynthia has. Um, I'm going to keep it short, but we can go into it some point more. What Cynthia is referring to is kind of a very subtle way. Okay, when we meditate, when we develop the idea of reality, we talked about reality last week. And a reality is everything within the Buddhist practice, even the nature reality, the meditation, the development, because that's wisdom. When we're talking about developing wisdom, we're talking about developing our understanding and perception of reality. To develop the perception of reality, we first have to develop an understanding of what that is. And like we did, touched on it last week. What I didn't mention last week, because it gets, remember that the topic of reality or emptiness, sometimes referred to as emptiness, uh, is about one third of all of the Buddhist teachings. One third. And there's 100 volumes of Buddhist teachings. It would take someone reciting those teachings. I did a calculation at one point. I think I calculated it would take 40 days to recite all the teachings. And they do it really fast. So the the danger or the challenge in understanding nature realities are what we do is we always put something there, a mental image. It's this, okay? Emptiness of inherent existence is not a thing. It's the absence of a thing. Okay. So, Cynthia, when you are meditating, and I'm just I'll try and keep it short. When you're meditating on the emptiness of the I or an object, it's all the same thing, all the same approach. One of the things we meditate on is that this I is constructed of parts, right? And I was going to get to that in a few minutes. There's no there's no affirming thing in absence of that, in opposition to that. So when I say Kim is not a boy, okay, that's an affirming negative because it affirms she's a woman, right? When I say the I is not constructive of parts, I'm not saying anything in its place. It just means it's a dependent arise, it's something that's dependent. And what falls away is the perception of it being monolithic. It's the falling away of that concept that is the emptiness of it and the nature of its reality. Okay. I don't know if that explains it. We could go into so another affirming negative is it's not permanent, right? And so the affirming negative is it's impermanent because it can only be one or the other. Okay. When we see that something doesn't exist inherently, it's that observation, it doesn't exist inherently, that's the experience of the emptiness of it. So it's not, that's why I don't like the word voidness. Voidness implies an object. Oh, I see the void. That's not correct. You don't see the void. Okay, you see the absence of solidity. It's a different thing. Okay? And then you hang out in that absence of anything inherently existing, and that's meditating on the emptiness of it. Okay? So in a way, the flip side of emptiness is something that's interdependent. But interdependence, oh God, I'm getting too much. Sorry. You got me going. It's not good. I was going to say the opposite of interdependence is not exactly emptiness. I mean, the opposite of dependence. Anyway, point is so when you have the experience of things being interdependent, that is the vehicle to realizing the emptiness of the thing. Okay? But it's not identical to emptiness. Sorry. Let's go on. How many people did I just lose there? Okay. Any other questions before I butchered that one or after I butchered that one? Okay. But we can go into that at some point, Cynthia. Well, that takes a little bit of work for us to do. Okay, that's the independent one. Let me move on. Okay, just quickly. So that's the thing is that our self, our identity is relational. It's in relationship to things. Okay? If something's in relationship, that's a synonym in this case for being dependent. So if something can't be independent and dependent at the same time. And these for a lot of us, these new ideas, it's the way to think of it is not to get too hung up, is just to get familiar with this. Oh, this idea. Wow. I never thought of that before. Never ever thought about the fact, and people wouldn't, that if something is in relationship, then it's not independent. Because relation and dependent can be synonyms in this case. Okay. But nothing is independent. Everything is dependent on causes, conditions, you know, stories and culture, and on and on. Biology, language, shape, identity. It's just the thing to understand in this is if you can just begin to think about that you and I misconceive our identity. That's my point here. It doesn't have to get so arcane right now if it's too arcane for you and too, complex. Just work with the idea that the sense of identity, your sense of a self, thinks it's independent, and it can't be independent if it's dependent. Then go to the next step and just analyze, well, is it dependent or not? I'm not going to just take Karuna's word for it or Buddha's word for it. Is it dependent or not? Okay. Okay. So this is the illusion of a fixed identity. Okay. Um, Identity is constantly changing. Emotions, beliefs, and personality evolve over time. Yet we cling to labels and fixed self-images. So the question I have, um, sorry. So identity is constantly changing. Is when you were 7 years old, or are you the same identity today? When you're 21, are you the same identity as today? If something is, so I think we can say no. It feels like the same, doesn't it? Because you say, oh, when I was 7 I learned how to swim, right? We feel when I was 7 is the same guy as when I am now, right? Yes or no? That sense of self, my self-conception. Do you feel you're the same as that 7-year-old or different? Which one? Can't be both. They're mutually exclusive. If we feel, oh, I must be the same because, uh, I have the same parents, I remember that. Yeah, I'm the same. So if you're the same, then you would be a 7-year-old mentality, right? Which we know we're not. So then we're different. Which is it? So if we're different now than then, we're a different person. Kind of like, kind of like if you believe in rebirth, like when you die and you take rebirth, and this lifetime you're a man, and this next lifetime, I don't know, some sort of bird. The same or different? So the earlier self, is it the same self or different self? We think it's the same self, don't we? But it's kind of obvious that, wait, there's been change. So if something's changing, can it be the same? It- And and if it's changing, Ferdy,
The only problem I have is with the word the same. And I see that when I think about Buddha nature, for example, all right, if underneath all of this there is an evolving, an evolution, and I think about any other life form that I can see, there is a continuity of consciousness. Even what we're learning is there's a continuity of consciousness across all of this. So the issue I have is not with the concepts, it's with the word same. The word same itself seems to me
so it's
to
a
create a
flow, right?
contradiction. Yeah, it's
So
a
it's so
flow.
it's
Exactly.
so it's a flow means it's changing, correct?
Right, right.
Yeah. So why do we say mm, why do we say I'm what's your career?
That's one that's been very changeable. I guess at heart, I'm an educator and an
Okay.
artist. So there.
Okay. So, but I'm an educator. Well, then when does that change? Where is the educator?
When I lose my curiosity and stop wanting to know more, then it will
Okay.
change.
So where is the educator? The I who's the educator. Where is that?
It's nowhere. It's around the doing that we do is how that manifests. But I can
But you
see
can
where
see,
the label is
right.
useless. The label
Yeah.
is useless.
But yet we all label it.
Right.
And if it was useless, then if I were to say, can the educator stand up, please? You'd have to stand up. So it's not useless. But when I say, can the educator stand up? What is the sense of self there? I am the educator, right? Where is the educator? That's my question.
Hmm.
You know, and is that educator something that's moving or fixed? Another way of saying this fixed, is it moving or fixed?
Moving all the time.
So when it's moving all the time, then when I say to you, you're a lousy educator, you wouldn't get upset, would you? Or you're a great educator, you wouldn't get proud. You're pretty good. Most of us, what could I say then? Do you see what I'm saying then? So if it's moving moment to moment, right? Right. And all of a sudden your retirement money for being an educator stopped. Okay. Then you say, wait a minute. So that identity, I'm an educator. Why, or I was, I'm an educator. Why did they stop making my pension or whatever, retirement payments? But if it's moving, like you said, where's the educator? Okay, I'll go to another slide because I think I can do something. Point is to jump around. So this sense of educator, this sense of identity is something that feels permanent. That means unchanging. At least in that moment, it's fixed. Now, intellectually, we go, yeah, I was a kid, and then I was a baseball player, and then I was an artist, and then I was an educator. We say it, but that's not the level we're talking on. We're talking about right now, the way we conceive ourselves. And the educator is like trying to put a post-it on flowing water, isn't it? That's my point. That's what we do with the identity. There's this fluidity, there's this flow. And you can't even find when the educator became an educator and when he wasn't an educator. What point was that? When you got your degree? Right? I'm just using you as an example. You don't have to answer. And everyone should extrapolate from what I'm talking about with Ferdy with themselves. At what time, Kim, did you become a publicist? You know, it's the flowing thing, and then we say, I'm a publicist. And you can see this with our own problem is that the more we solidly hang on to that identity, guess what happens? The more we suffer. Okay? The more we suffer because if I'm a okay, if I'm like parenthood, like I'm a father, and then you can have degrees of how you think of yourself, right? And we're not all the same. Some people, their whole identity is being put into being a mother or a father. And then they have a child who's misbehaving or just has maybe even has some psychological issues. What happens with the mother then? And I'm generalizing, please forgive me for doing that, just to make a point. Could be a father, mother. What they do is, I failed. I've had, as a psychotherapist, I had many parents who had troubled children. They felt embarrassed in the supermarket because the kid was misbehaving, throwing things off the shelf. Other parents are going to have different reactions, different experiences, depending on how much they cling to their identity as being true and fixed and permanent. So if you're a software engineer, okay, and you build up, because this is the way our culture sets us up, is to build our identity and our ego as being a software engineer, and you do really well, and you graduate, and you go through your training, you get a good job at Apple, and then downsizing. And they're going to cut 20% of the staff, and they cut you. That's the problem with a fixed sense of identity. I'm a software engineer, not only that, I'm a good one. Okay? That's who I am. They should know better than that. That's what we're talking about. This happens throughout our life. This happens throughout our day. But in the more important level, thinking of it in terms of our life, or husband, wife, or whatever, partners. Okay. How would when you fall in love in that relationship, is your identity same or different than 15 years later when you're fighting about it and getting separating, a divorce? What happened? What happened? A shift in identity. The person themselves saw you in a different identity. Oh, you used to be so generous and loving, and now you're cold. You don't communicate. You, right? When you meet and you fall in love, the person's saying you. You're so kind. You're so handsome or beautiful, right? Right? You is the same thing. They're talking about an identity. Then what happens? And it's seen as fixed and permanent. If it's fixed and permanent, no way it could become unloving, selfish, quiet, withdrawn. But that's why we're so shocked. You were so loving before. You were such a good communicator. It's because of the clinging to the identity of that person. And you can apply this to yourself as well, of course, because we do it with both subject and object. So the myth of identity, we're talking about the subject in this class, but it doesn't matter. If it gives you more insight to think about your partner or your boss or your coworkers who you got along with so well, and all of a sudden, yeah, I know, Isabel she was talking about all this smack about me. It wasn't true behind my back. And she's just doing it so that she can get a promotion and then, it's competing with me, all this stuff. And Isabel was your best friend. And that's not who I am. They know who I am. And then, you lose your job or you don't get the promotion. What's with the identity then? Which identity are you? Painful, isn't it? People do well with that kind of thing when they have an understanding that this sense of identity is fluid. The sense of identity is not fixed. Okay? And you can see this in people whom we admire, respect. Wow, you handled that so well. You just got laid off. How come you're not more upset? Well, because our identity is different than the upset person would be. It might be for dysfunctional reason or not, but it shows that the identity is not fixed. And it shows that a fixed identity is a problem. Okay, so let's just, so I just want to actually check in with you. Does this make sense that you've had an identity that's fallen away? Does that resonate for people? Is it helpful? And anyone want to just, yeah, I mean, if you don't have to say anything, by the way, I don't mean it that way, but just if you have something to share about this concept, because I want it to kind of resonate for people. Can you imagine if you were more fluid in your identity? And how many identities have you had fall away? I mean, were you, when you think about your first relationship, falling in love, and if you didn't marry that person, has that identity shifted? Or even you did marry that person, or you're together, whatever, has that identity shifted? Were you once a different career than you are now? Like Ferdy was talking about artist and educator. So at one point, I don't know which was first, but your identity might have been more around artist, being an artist or educator. I don't know. That's fallen away now, you know? And then it really gets complicated when we talk about gender, transgender, people change, people's identity. That's a very that's a very, very powerful identity is one's gender. Imagine what it's like that gender identity begins to shift. What is that like? Right? Or for example, people who invest so much in their career and they're not really that good at it. because it wasn't quite the right fit, maybe. Something their parents told them to do. I don't know. There's a lot of reasons, you know. And a friend, a friend of mine, he became a he became a bus driver in Seattle. And he's a longtime Buddhist. He's lived in India now for many, many years. But he used to tell this story about before he became Buddhist and going to, the family dinners, and his grandmother would turn to him and says, "You still going to become a doctor?" You know, the next dinner, "When are you going to become a doctor?" He's a bus driver, just gets stoned all the time, and then eventually became a Dharma bum. But it's just, she had an identity for him. He didn't have that identity for himself. Um, and when we get criticized, particularly for our work, that is a good example of challenging our identity. So the problem is not the person doesn't recognize your qualities. And we're talking now as on our deeper psychological level, of course. I'm not talking about that person because there could be problems with that person, of course. But we're talking about when you get upset by it, the upsetness, if we want to develop a healthy mind, then the healthy mind will start to look at the attachment, the clinging to your identity as being a good whatever that they're criticizing you for. With parenthood, right? We get criticized as parents. Okay. We get criticized in our jobs. Um, yeah. And the best people to be around is our family because they always are calling us out, even if they're not right.
So is the goal then equanimity in the face of the criticism? I mean, is that part of the freedom?
The effect, the effect of seeing the fluidity of the identity and the clinging is equanimity. That's what's beautiful about this path. It's really because uh, it's one, yes, there are practices and ideas and teachings about developing equanimity, but fundamentally how equanimity gets developed is by understanding this dynamic. Yes. Same with compassion and love. Compassion and love are automatic effects of seeing the nature of problems and suffering in people. Because we know that it's just a natural effect. I mean, of course, one could turn off to it and deny it, and get scared, or that we know that. But generally speaking, when we see, just on a very, very kind of ordinary level, when one of our friends is suffering, we automatically feel a sense of compassion and love, compassion, or our kids, or our partners, or our parents. Isn't that interesting? It's automatic. I mean, unless, well, there can be reasons it's not automatic too, but I'm just talking in a general sense. So the trick is that's again going back to why Buddha taught about suffering first. This is why. Because to develop the positive qualities is to understand the negative ones and understanding them in the right way. There's a wrong way and a right way. Okay. You know what happens? So this myth of identity, what happens is when you start even uncovering this stuff, whether you do it in the Buddhist path or in meditation, or you do it in therapy, or in relationship, is then what happens is this other thing that's, oh, I'm so bad. Oh, I'm so deluded. Oh, I have so many afflictions. Oh God, I have so many mental disorders. I remember when we were studying, I heard this from many of my friends and colleagues. When you study for your um, degree in psychology, whether it's a master's or PhD, and you spend, I think in my case, we spent 2 full semesters studying psychopathology. And every week, you're going to a different category of, whether mood disorders or whatever, and depressive disorder, mood disorder, psychotic disorders, all those things, because they're categorized. And each week you go to a different, and each week you have those. Oh yeah, I think I figured out, yeah, I am really depressed. And the next week, yeah, I figured out I do have little kind of a psychotic quality. Yes, I know I'm a sociopath. All this. So that's the flip side. As people become more interested in Buddhist studies, you see that they become Westerners. Tibetans don't do. I haven't noticed this with Tibetans ever. But us Westerners, what do we get? Depressed. I'm so messed up. I can't even believe it. I have no equanimity. I have so much attachment. I have so much anger. I don't have any wisdom. And then but that's all just ego grasping again. You see? Identity grasping, ego grasping. It's the same thing. You're just turning the lens around. That's all we're doing. Okay. That's like what happens with, well, I don't know, with alcoholics and becoming dry drunks, they say, but that's a bit of a generalization. But it's to change one's mindset does not happen quickly. It doesn't happen because you read a Buddhist book or you went to a 1 month meditation course or even after a year or two. It doesn't happen quickly because it's the first thing that has to happen is education. And with education, there's not necessarily much change on the fundamental level. Okay. That doesn't happen until we start reflecting and meditating and practicing. Okay. I'll share a few more. Oh, mm. So think about the various identities you've had, and you were fixed. I am this, I am that, I'm in love, I'm in hate, I'm a student, I'm an athlete, I'm a software engineer, all those things, and they fall away. And how does that feel, by the way? You know, I, this falling away of identity is usually pretty devastating for us, unless we want to give it up. Why we talk about death as being such an intense time is because it's the falling away of an identity. Is the identity being I am this. We call it self-grasping. This grasping to a self, I am, and we have a strong sense, whatever that, however you want to finish that sentence, as we get, if we die a natural death, or not, maybe not a natural death, but not a sudden death anyway, we begin to what we fear and what becomes existentially terrifying is the loss of self. So study this stuff now, you guys. Meditate on it now, because when the time comes, you and I are not going to be able to do it. You will be able to do it if you train now. Okay, and also the loss of identity, like at death and all that, does not mean the loss of you. It's not annihilation. It's a loss of a misconception, a fantasy, an hallucination of who we are. So let's do it now. It doesn't mean extinction. Like when Cynthia was asking about non-affirming negative, it doesn't mean that the opposite of losing your identity is not having any identity and not existing. That is not true. If that were the purpose of practicing Buddha's path, who would want to do that? So that it's not that. It's the falling away of these this grasping of identity that prevents us from actualizing and experiencing our true identity. Okay, there is a true identity. Okay? It's relative, by the way, just to make that clear. But it exists. It does exist. We are not, if you're like me, we're not in touch with it. When we confront the false identities, and you've studied the right things, not to meditate, the real identity will begin to blossom, and that real identity is, well, ultimately, it's that awakened mind which we label as Buddha, but it's your Buddha. You don't become another Buddha. You become your Buddha. When people talk about Buddha nature, unfortunately, what tends to happen is they're talking about uh, a euphemism for soul. Okay. That's just because way we're trained religiously and philosophically. The Buddha nature is not the same thing as a soul. Okay. But it is the potential of becoming fully enlightened, awakened, and happy and fulfilled. Fully awakened. Okay. Sometime we should talk about what that is, huh? So, so the ego, I, or me, these all are synonyms. The unhealthy ego becomes defensive, fearful, and self-protective. So what we're protecting is the nice guy, husband, wife. You just defend yourself as a friend identity. These are all different identities. You know, if you were such a great friend, why didn't you come over the other day when you knew that my dog had died and I would be suffering? Well, I mean, why didn't you even call? Right? That's the identity that we're talking about. That self. That self is hurting. It's hurting because of a misconception. Okay, and I remember I talked about, and I'm gonna go a little. Let's see, where are we at in times? Yeah. So look at these in the father, mother, worker, son, daughter, artist. These are all just different identities. Athlete, Buddhist, conservative, liberal, man, woman. So if your identity is liberal, what happens to you when this happens? If your identity is a conservative, what happens when this happens, when you see this? Okay, now, this picture is just a bunch of pixels, isn't it? It's just color and shape, isn't it? Is there anything more here than color and shape? But I'm guessing that most of us had some reaction when we saw this picture. True or not? So I have to be careful. I don't care about being that careful. I mean, I don't want to offend anybody, but a lot of us would just immediately have a visceral reaction of kind of anger, right? Disappointment, sadness, maybe. So why? Okay, let's say I get offended. I just see this and I can't even look at it, right? That's because, in part, or in large part, of how I see myself and how I see him. So I have a label for his identity too, don't I? Yeah. Fixed. Can you see it? Permanent, fixed. He's this, which means I'm this. And because I'm a liberal, I'm right and he's wrong. And I'm going to do something about it. And I feel pissed off and I feel irritated, agitated, right? And we believe that's real when all that is constructed. Can you see that? It's just a construction, but I don't see it that way. It's just a construction. I'm really sorry, but the Iran war and my reactions to it is it's all constructed. Doesn't mean it's not happening. It's just not happening the way I see it and think, and the media reports it, which is okay. It's our job to deconstruct it, not theirs necessarily. Well, it'd be good if they did. We get upset about the Iran war, but I ask you something. Where is the Iran war anyway? You say Iran. Where is Iran? Which part is Iran? The coast? The middle? Oh, it's a monolithic country. It's just one thing. Well, it's not. There's people there, there's cities, there's towns. What is Iran? Not any other than a label. Someone drew some lines and they said that's Iran. And now we're at war with Iran. But it's a concept. I'm not saying that bad things aren't happening and suffering. I'm not saying that. I'm talking about our mentality. I'm talking about our mentality. That's what we do. Same thing with Trump or anyone else, that agitates or you feel attracted to, doesn't matter. Okay. I can't, you can't find, there's just, with that picture right there, all it is a picture. All it is shape and color. Everything else are elaborations from our minds, isn't it? So if you want to, if it's just elaboration, you know what the beauty is, the freedom is, create a different elaboration. That's freedom. That's freedom. But we can't do it, can we? Why can't we do it? I don't know for people who read the book, um, I think it's in this chapter. I think, yeah, it's in this chapter. I tell the story of a woman at our monastery who has a psychotic break. And Lam Yeshe's the leader of the meditation course. There's a 1 month meditation course that's gone on now for 53 years or something. A very powerful course at Kopan, the monastery in Nepal. And I tell this story often, and that there was one woman, a German woman, who during this 1 month course, which is very intensive, you know, in those days we're doing 10 hours a day of meditation and several, or something like that, and 4 or 5 hours of teachings from Lama Zopa, Rinpoche. It's very intense, and you know, you're sleeping short nights. Last 2 weeks, you're eating only one meal a day in those days and keeping silent. So it's really an intense environment. So this one woman started what I now understand is sort of having a psychotic break, and you know, she'd sit on the wall and you know, just where people would walk by down below, and she'd be hissing at them like a snake and pretending she's not pretending, you know, feeling like she was a snake. And it's really intimidating, you know. So I remember the course leader was a American nun, very soft, very gentle, old hippie, and so I went up. So this German woman, this woman's also got more and more out of hand, where she started breaking windows in the temple and stuff like that. So I felt I had to go to see Lam Yeshe about you know what to do. And as I went up to Lam Yeshe's room, I could hear him talking inside with the course leader, this nun, American nun, and you know it's getting kind of excuse me kind of animated in the room. I didn't go in, you know, I was just listening outside. And so I can hear her arguing with Lama, saying, "But Lama, you know, if any place in the whole world can care for this woman, it has to be this monastery we're at now, this Buddhist monastery where all this, you know, practicing of this perfect path of healing, and we have these lamas who are very advanced, and you know." And Lama saying, "No, no, no, dear, she needs to go. She can't be here." And then she'd argue back, "But Lama, how can you teach all these ideas, love and compassion, equanimity, and then have her leave? How can you do that?" And he said, "Well, she needs to go to the hospital. Take her to the hospital." And for those, it's like a one flew over the cuckoo's nest kind of idea. Hospitals in those days in Nepal, this is like 19, I don't know, maybe 1979, 1980. And she said, and so she kept arguing, and Lam said, "No, she needs to go to the hospital." "But Lam, the hospital," he said, she needs to see a psychiatrist. And again, the nun, you know, kept arguing back. And finally, I heard Lama slam his fist on the table and saying, "Take her now. Buddhism is for healthy people, dear." Wow. Buddhism is for healthy people. How do you situate that? With this in line with you need a healthy ego to practice the Buddhist path. Healthy ego just, I think we can all just, I think we probably know what that means. You know, I think it's, you know, to be free of this ego, you need a healthy one to start with. You need a healthy foundation. And sometimes people come to the Buddhist teachings, the Buddhist path, who are not healthy enough to be practicing these ideas. They need therapy. They need whatever they need to get to a functioning place. So then they can begin to, otherwise, it's too, it can be very, how to say, um, it can be very dangerous. It's not healthy to start talking about these ideas of the ego and the identity, you know, how the identity doesn't really exist that way. People didn't have sort of just ending in, they can have this psychotic break, they can have a break from reality. This happens. You can't have a break from this relative reality, even though it doesn't exist the way we see it. You can't, you, you can't go to the place of seeing it as like a hallucination if you don't have the equipment and the background to deal with that and to transform it into a spiritual path. I think people who are in institutions or people who are psychotic, schizophrenic, sometimes I think, well, it's almost like they have a glimpse of reality, but they don't have the equipment to handle it. Okay. It's like putting, um, it's like putting a Ferrari engine into a Prius, you know, it's just going to blow it up. That's what I think. So the goal is not self-annihilation. The task is to uncover unhealthy ego structures. Healthy functioning and spiritual insight can coexist. They do coexist. They have to coexist. Okay, so let's what I want to do. I so much you guys got about 4 more hours we can continue. Um, give me a chance here. See all this? Okay. That's another one of my soapboxes is, we get these buzzwords every 2 years out of psychology, there's attention deficit disorder was the one, and bipolar was one, and all these things, and autism, and which I'm not saying they don't exist, by the way. I don't mean to sound like that. I don't mean to sound flippant, but they become popular. Maybe it's the drug companies that do this. I don't know. But anyway, now lately it's more like the traumatized self. And these are always presented as something self-existent, permanent, existing independently. You see? Just be careful of that. It doesn't mean they don't exist, but they exist relatively in relationship. Okay? One last thing I want to do here. So meditation allows direct observation of identity. When you meditate, what we're doing is investigating. So mindfulness has become sort of, say, it's become kind of corrupted in many ways. So mindfulness really includes, it includes focus and it includes introspection. Okay? I won't go into details because this is a whole very, very long course just to teach what meditation is. But in this case, what I would like to ask you to do, if you do spend any time, do your breath meditation, go into, calming the mind, and then I just want you to become familiar with what the identity is. That's all. Just ask yourself, what is this thing? Karuna's talking about independently. I have no idea what he meant. Let's see if you can see what it means. He said it's permanent, doesn't change. I have no idea what that means. Okay, permanence means something that doesn't change moment to moment. Impermanence is changes moment to moment. Is my conception of this identity permanent or impermanent? Just investigate. When you investigate, you'll see that the way you see it, is you see it as permanent when it's not. But just hang out with that, okay? You just want to hang out and become familiar with these. You know that the translation of meditation from Tibetan, and I think it comes from Sanskrit as well, is not focus. It's not concentration. It's to become familiar. Isn't that beautiful? If you knew that from the very beginning, when you heard about meditation, it meant become familiar, I think I think we'd be doing better as a culture. Nothing wrong with what people are doing. Well, I shouldn't say there's nothing wrong. There could be, but it's so much more rewarding to think, I want to become familiar with my identity. What was Karuna talking about? But now the interesting thing to become, you need introspection, but you also need focus because you can't wander all over the place. So yes, focus is part of meditation, developing focus. But what do you do with the focus? Then you turn it on to these topics. And if you get a chance, just as you're in the supermarket, you're going through your day, just stop now and then and go, who's doing this? Who's shopping? Who's driving? Who's meditating? And then zero in on who you think that is. Okay? That's a lot, huh? That is a ton. Okay.
Karuna,
Yes.
I wanted just to let everyone know that I put a link to Karuna's new book in the chat if anyone's interested in ordering it.
Okay.
And also to mention that anyone that already ordered it through Amazon who enjoyed it, if you would leave a review, it would be a huge help to Karuna and the book.
It can be it should be an honest review. So if it's bad, that's okay. Because otherwise, I don't want to be inauthentic, right?
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I
That
said
should be okay.
if you enjoyed it.
I had it's really funny. I had the first book, The Misleading Mind, got good reviews, but then I noticed because of my attachment to my identity and the identity of the book, that someone had left like 1 star. So I go, what the heck? I went to this one, I read the review, and it said, I got someone stole my book. I was in the first chapter. Someone stole my book on the subway. So I gave it 1 star. I tried to get Amazon to remove it, but they said, "Oh, it doesn't fit within our whatever guidelines to remove." So, so there's that too. Any other questions, comments? What do we have next week? Which myth? Myth of permanence. Okay, they're all related, all these myths. Okay, so I think anything else? No. Okay. Okay, then. Thank you, and see you next time.